What is happening, Flip Flop fam? I'm super excited to have David Webb here today with me. But David, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
I'm David Webb. I'm the No Money Millionaire. So I buy property without using a dime of my own money. But beyond that, I help other people break their mindset that it's not possible or they don't have enough to do it. They don't have the money. They don't have the credit. And so, it's more than a money problem. It's a mindset problem. And I help them overcome that because the rest is easy.
Yeah, that was basically what I was talking with the last guest about. About
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
it's all we were talking about nomadic lifestyle stuff, but it all just comes down to everything comes down to mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, I came out of the real estate development world. We got a lot of guys from that world to listen to this show. But give me a little bit of your journey. How'd you end up doing this? What's your background?
I had a sales background I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I grew up in the inner city there, single mother on welfare, Detroit public school system. And, where I grew up in the inner city, I don't even know if I knew anyone who owned a home. It was never even really, really spoken about. You were lucky if you're renting, really, and, most people's on welfare. And so, cash flow, passive income, none of that was ever taught. So, matter of fact, in Detroit, you're taught the opposite. You're taught you have to work hard for your money. There's nothing about money working hard for you. So, I didn't know anything about it. I just knew I wanted to get into real estate. I didn't know how, I didn't know why. And, my first two real estate deals I did with no money. I did with no money out of pocket, but when I talk about that mindset, I was strapped down with that mindset. Even after doing two no money deals, I still didn't know what I had done. I still was working, trying to get my down payment, trying to get my credit right, trying to get everything. I fell into those other two deals just kind of blindly. Um, and then I was going another 10 years or so after that, still trying to get my pieces right. So the whole no money method came to me when it clicked because I had bought my first property in the mid 90s and I continued buying property, making mistakes, not knowing what I was doing. And then around 2020 is when I really got serious. I had been reading all the material out there, all the books and everything, trying to learn, but it was French to me. I didn't understand what they were saying until I finally wanted this apartment building. And I wanted it so badly, I just didn't have the capital to do it. And I just could not let it go. And I just tried to figure it out. And once I did that, then it's been nonstop ever since.
Man, I love it. I remember I did my first real estate deal. I was 21 years old. I'd moved to graduated college from UT down the road there in Toledo
Yeah.
and moved 4 days after school to Charleston and rented for about 4 months and bought my first house, which became my first rental property. And was a landlord for the next 25 years. I just now sold
Nice.
everything off. So,
Nice.
but at any rate, man, I just remember telling my mom, like, if I can hustle houses like I've hustled cars, like at that point, I'd probably
Yeah.
had, 25 cars. I said, I think I'm going to be all right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was the same thing. And I think what I love about what you're saying is that I still get chills when people they're like, "Well, I got to go to the bank and talk to them about a loan," and it's like, "Oh my God!" It's like the worst, the absolute worst thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
And you start
Yeah.
to realize there is so much money out there to put deals together if it's the right deal, and people are happy to give it to you. And
Yeah.
it's a
100%.
major mindset shift you got to get over.
It is. It is. I had people trying to explain it to me along the way, and it was French to me, man. I just couldn't. I couldn't take the blinders off from what I had developed or been taught my whole life. You need a down payment. You have to have perfect credit. You have to have your tax returns, the last 2, 3 years tax returns. And so it took a long time to be able to shed that and break that away. It actually comes away in layers, little by little by little. And it wasn't until I wanted that apartment building that it all kind of clicked. It really, yeah.
I think for me, I was trying to buy a place we were using a like kind of a private banker. Um, where we were doing some other deals, and they pulled the plug on the deal I was trying to do at the last minute, and I had to scramble. And I
Yeah.
literally just started going through my phone. I was like, who do I know that might have, $500,000 laying around? And I was
Right.
like, hell if I'm going to
Exactly.
let this deal fall apart,
Yeah.
And next thing you know, 2 days later, I had a 3-page promissory note and deal was done, and away we went, So yeah, I think once your eyes are open to that, it's hard to unsee it. So what are symptoms that I need you? Like how are, I'm out there, I'm listening to this, I'm still thinking I'm calling BS. I'm like, that doesn't work for people like me, David. So
Yeah.
how do I know I need you? How can you help me?
Well, first of all, if you're saying that this is BS, that's the first thing right there. If you don't, if you haven't done this and you don't believe it's possible, that's what I help people do. I just had this guy from Detroit come out here where I'm at. He had never thought he was going to own property. He had accepted it. He had accepted it, just wasn't in his, in his future. And he was renting a one of my buildings. I was actually leasing a building. I was trying to buy it, and the guy decided we just could never agree on come to terms. And so I pulled out of it. And I told the guy, I said, "Listen, I'm pulling out of the building, and the owner doesn't want." There was an apartment in the back. It was a commercial unit with an apartment in the back, and I said the owner doesn't want anyone living in it. And so he came to me and said, "Well, what about one of your other properties?" And nothing I had really would work. They were in the area he needed to be in. And I said, "Well, buy something." I said, "You're out here with, buy something." He's like, "I can't. I don't have, any of this. I don't have." I said, "You can do it." I said, "Let's just make it happen." And this was just back in August. And he closed on a triplex, no money out of pocket. Two units were leased up. One unit was empty. He was able to move into that unit. He was collecting rent at closing day. He closed on the first. He collected rent. He went in with no money out of pocket, owned a triplex, and was collecting rent. So, that's what I can help people do.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It reminds me like when we were kids, the old Carlton Sheets
Yeah.
infomercials that used to be all over
Yeah.
TV.
Yeah.
Um, Let me ask you this. Do you think I have my own opinions on this? We both grew up obviously around the same area in Michigan, and there's just this hourly mindset. Like everybody I knew worked for the big three, and it's how much can I make per hour and how many hours do I have to work to make a car payment? And they just never, and I've got guys I went to school with and stuff, they're 45, 50 years old now, and they still, "Oh, I'm gonna get a raise at Jeep. I'm gonna get double time
Yeah.
this weekend." How much of that do you think is just where we grew up?
Well, I definitely know that plays a role in it because exactly what you said. Everyone I know is in that mindset, and I it just wasn't in me. It just wasn't in me. I was an all commission salesperson. I didn't want to be capped. I would look at it, and I went to school early and for massage therapy. And so I was doing the massage thing for a chiropractor in Michigan. And, at most, if you're just like booked up, you can do five in a day. And, that's hard on you as is. And at the time I was getting $40 an hour, which that's a big hourly wage. But you can only do five. So this is what I looked at. I said, you can only do five a day. And man, you'll be beat up if you did five a day for 5 days. But that was 200 a day, 5 days, 1,000 a week. That's it. That's the max I can make. And I just, that whole hourly thing, you're capped. There is no success with that. And I know people who are doing that day to day, and that's their comfort zone. Like you just asked where we're from. That's their comfort zone. Even though they know they're struggling, even though they know they're not making ends meet, even though they know they're coming to retirement and probably going to go now to less of livelihood than they had while they were working, they're still under the mindset that they can't do this. I talk to people all the time about it where I'm from, and I'm like, "Man, let's get this going for you." And they're like, "Well, I don't have it." So it's a lot to do with where we're from. And, because again, like I said, we're not taught cash flow. We're not taught passive income. None of that's taught to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is definitely, I had to learn along the way. And and part of the struggle, like I wish somebody like you would have been around when when I was, 20, 21 years old, because I had to break out of that Midwest hourly. My
Yeah.
dad was the same way, and my mom was the same way. It's like it's just everybody you knew. I think my uncle, he was the youngest. My dad's the oldest of five brothers. My uncle's the youngest, but he had a car lot there in Toledo called Manatee Motors. And I just remember
Okay.
growing up and watching him, and I'm like, man, he gets to live a little different than dad. Like
Yeah.
I need to figure this out. He's
Yeah.
out on the boat, he's having fun. And that's kind of what sparked it in me at a really young age to just think, I don't really think I'm ever going to work for anybody.
Yeah.
And real estate just always became the natural progression. It was, and it's still to this day. I mean, yeah, I made a lot of money building houses and stuff, but like the bulk of my money came from real estate holdings and flipping. We got to the point where we're flipping $1 million+ houses, and
Nice.
it just
Yeah.
turns into and again, not with my money.
Right.
I was putting the deals
Exactly.
together,
Yeah.
and saying, "Hey guys." So yeah, man, I agree, and it's a shame, when people they just you can tell that they're never going to get out of that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you because at least on my side, I talk with a lot of guys. I used to do these 20-minute blueprint calls, which are basically triage calls to see if they would be a fit to work together if I could help them at all.
Sure.
And you've got the guys that for 20 minutes they're going to argue for why everything doesn't work and why it won't work. And I'm not going to die on that hill with them. I'm not here
Yeah.
to teach you that that's not in fact the case. I'm there for the guy in the middle that knows there's a better way and he's problem aware. Like where does that land for you? Like somebody, I'm sure you have the exact same thing in your world. Like at what point can you help somebody?
Like I'm not going to waste a lot of my energy, with people. I had a woman who worked for me, and she worked at one of my buildings. It was a 20 unit that I own, and she was a manager of one of the stores there. And I was coming out telling her about my book, The No Money Millionaire, the No Money Method, and she was like, that just doesn't make any sense. Nobody would do that. And I'm like, well, it makes sense because I'm doing it and you work for me. I'm like, so you're in one of my buildings that I've done this with. So it works, but just was refusing to accept it, just refusing. And so it does take that person that is wanting to do better instead of just the naysayer and just it can't. That whole mindset. Somewhere in me, there was a book that was given to me, the little train that thinks he could. I think I can, I think I can, and it's really been that way for me. I think I can, and luckily for me, I had somebody like my father was at Chrysler, my brother was at Chrysler, the whole thing, but I went and did that massage because I knew this chiropractor and he told me about it. And he said, "Here, look into this." And I saw $40 an hour, man. But then there was a friend of mine who was in a sales industry, and he'd come and hang out with me at the salon and made more money than me. And I was joking with him one day. I said, "Man, I want your job. I want to come hang out with me and make more money than me." I said, "That's what I want to do." And he said, "Okay, I'll ask." And he came back. He said, "Okay, I got you in." I'm like, "Well, am I doing what you're doing?" And he said, "No, we're going to make you a salesman." I'm like, "Well, they make any money?" And he said, "They make more money." I said, "Okay, great. Let's do it." And I had an amazing teacher, mentors, amazing. And he taught me really about sales and about the ceilings and why all commission is the way to go. And that I think is the one step below the entrepreneur. That one, once you've done all commission sales for a while, bridging that gap into being your own, solo operator or independent business owner is just, it's just the next step. And so that's what helped me bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of guys. I mean, I was the same thing. I was 100% commission sales in a lot of different things. Before I was, fully, I always had something going, but never like a quote unquote actual business. I had the
Yeah.
stuff I started through college and high school, et cetera. But I think you're right, and I think that sales is still the biggest hang up for almost everybody I work with. And I'm mostly builders. and developers, and they're notorious for they just sit in their car, wait for millions of dollars to fall from the sky. And
Right.
it's especially this time of year, I laugh because I'm like, how are you planning 2026? They have
Yeah.
zero outflow. They don't make any calls. They have no marketing. They're 100% referral. How are you planning 2026?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
please,
Yeah.
someone tell me,
Yeah.
and it comes back to, I think, the reason I was on a call with a guy yesterday, he was up in Indiana. It's him and his two boys were on the call, and they've got all this business. They're booked a year out. They're turning down work. So why aren't you just hiring more people to take the jobs now instead of turning jobs away? Well, I said, because you don't know where your next sale's really coming from. That's why.
Right.
Like, and
Yeah.
until you bridge that gap and you're
Yeah.
able to go out, and I know exactly how many clients I'm gonna have next year because I know what it takes
Right.
for me to get a client.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
math.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and these guys can't do that. So, man, yeah, I think sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I think you're 100% right that skill is just, it's one of those invaluable things. So where can people find you, man? Where do we find the book? Where can we learn more?
But you can just Google No Money Millionaire and you'll find me. But I am right now to anyone listening to your show, I'm offering my book for free on my website, nomoneymillionaire.com. It's No Money Millionaire, How to Build Wealth Through Real Estate Without Using a Dime of Your Own Money. And so you can get that right now. It's free. It's on the website. So go to nomoneymillionaire.com, download the book.
Awesome. Well, ton of useful information there, man. I can tell already. And all that'll be in the show notes in case you're driving or walking, etc. So the last guest, Dennis Meter, left you a question. You get to
Okay.
leave the next guest a question. So before I ask you yours, David, what would you like to ask the next guest?
Wow. Okay. Um, hmm. What would I ask your next guest, huh? Okay. Well, hmm. I don't even know what your next guest is. So
You never
that's
do.
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So, hmm. You stumped me on this one. I don't want to just say something just,
That's all
hmm.
right. Ben will edit it out. We'll give him the old clap. He'll
Yeah. 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 So let's see. Let's see what to say to your next guest. Huh. I guess I'll just, I don't know, just keep it simple and you know what's their definition of success?
I like that one. You get a wide variety of answers, but
Yeah,
with that one.
yeah, yeah. But it's curious to hear what people's definition of success is, because
Hmm.
to everyone is different. Um, and mine started as one thing and it's evolved over the time. You get to a certain level and then things change and so then you start finding out what really means stuff to you. So I guess that's what I'd ask.
No, I love it. They're you'd be surprised how many people have no idea what their definition of success is, and then they also wonder why they're not getting there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So the question left for you by he goes by DM because he's a junior. Where do you cultivate like-minded people like yourself to hang out with?
Interesting. You know, I I did a video about how I would get to where I'm at, if I had to start over. And it's just I'm really active with groups of where I want to be and where I'm at. So, I'm active with the Rotary Club, the chambers, the real estate investors groups and mastermind groups. And so I really because it's limited really of finding that quality or that energy attachment. You can meet a lot of people, but it's really limited the amount that I think that you really attract to. And so you just got to get yourself out there. And I try to get around, people that I want to get to where they're at. And so I put myself in those circles as much as possible.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more, dude. I just joined, which was a bit of a stretch for me, but I tell people I always want to be the dumbest guy in the room. I want to be the dumbest, least
Yeah,
wealthy guy
right.
in every
Exactly.
room I'm in.
Yeah.
And I've joined a lot of coaching programs. You know, I always say that if your coach doesn't have a coach, you're probably with the wrong coach. But and I've outgrown them all. You know, and this one is kind of like, at least for me right now, is kind of the pinnacle. It's like you got to be doing at least $1 million a year in coaching, you know, to even apply. And there's only 100 people in
Yeah.
the world in the group, and
Wow.
it's like Dan Martell and some of like the biggest names you've heard
Yeah.
in the space, you know.
Yeah.
And but I'm pumped, man. Like it starts in January, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think that surrounding yourself with the people who are at the level you want to be is like the biggest unlock on the face of the earth.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm a big believer in energy, and I let it really control my thoughts, and or at least I'm conscious of my thoughts because I'm aware of the energy that they tap into and stuff. And it's it's not frequently that you find like-minded people. I think people are really reckless with their thoughts, and they have no idea what they're creating in their path. And so I try to be more aligned with people that I see are thoughtfully creating what they're after, and those are important to me.
Yeah, my mom passed away, I guess during COVID, so it was probably about 5 years ago now. But she always wore a shirt that said, "Thoughts become things. Choose the good ones."
Yeah,
She
yeah,
wore
there
it
you
almost every day.
go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's true.
Oh,
Yeah, thoughts create form, and I'm very conscious of that. I think we transfer our thoughts to other people. Like, if you had a thought in your head and somebody said something, you're like, man, I was just thinking that. Or you said something and they say, well, I was just thinking that, or I was just going to say that. I think that's thought transference, and I've raised my son with that so much that you can tell if you received that thought or if you sent it, because you can trace down in your thinking how that thought originated, or all of a sudden it was just there. And once you're aware enough, you can see all of that. And so, I try, and once you're aware and you think this way, you won't even want to have bad thoughts in your mind, because then what? You're sending those now to people, and people have thoughts. They don't know why they have a certain thing about you, but they don't understand why, because man, you're sending that stuff out there. So I'm even cautious about what I think. So,
no, man. I mean, we could have a whole other show about the guy Dennis who just asked you that question about cultivating like-minded people. We probably spent half of that show talking about why you shouldn't watch the news.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, mainstream
yeah.
media, just the negativity cycle, and how what an effect that really has on people. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but are you
Sure.
familiar with the it's the new Dan Brown book, Secret of Secrets?
No, no, I'm not.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I was actually recommended. I was at Conscious Life Expo, if you're familiar with that, which is a whole other topic.
sure, sure.
But recommended the book. I'm not a fiction reader. Like if you look at my thousands of books, they're all business
Yeah,
books and psychology books, human behavior books.
yeah,
But
same here.
this one, it's fiction, but everything in it's real, everything in it's true. All the organizations are real, like a standard Dan Brown book is.
Yeah,
And it is basically the entire thing is about non-local consciousness and how your consciousness is just a radio receiver and everything
right.
is outside of your brain.
Yeah,
And you
right,
and the some of the studies, and again, big rabbit hole here, but where they're lighting up the three areas of a person's brain, and it was either something like really horrifying and graphic, something pleasurable, or something sexual, because the three areas are different. They can tell
right,
exactly what image that person's thinking of. And they've basically proven, and this is one piece of 100, but they've proven that the part of the brain was lighting up before the image was shown by a random image generator.
wow.
Think about that.
Yeah, interesting.
And it was 100% accurate.
Wow,
They were seeing
interesting.
it before it was on the screen. Like they're literally telling the guy, they're
Uh,
like,
that's
wow.
wild. That's
You know?
wild.
But I wholeheartedly believe in all of that. So I think meditation and all these other things that we do are so powerful. But
There was a book that I read. that changed my life. I used to hand it out to people. I'm sure it still is free online. You can find it. It was written in like early 1900s, 1910 or 1905, something like that. It's from a author named Wallace Wattles. It's called The Science of Getting Rich. And it's an amazing book. I think they read his book. Somebody took his book. And you remember the book that was out real popular, years back called The Secret?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I think The Secret, somebody read his book and then just rewrote and created The Secret in their own way. But The Science of Getting Rich, he had a whole series, The Science of Being Well or something. But The Science of Getting Rich really, really changed how I am cautious with my thoughts.
Well, dude, we're gonna have to have you back on. We'll just jam on that for an hour
Love to.
because
Yeah, love
there's a
to.
thousand
Yeah,
directions we could go there.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well, it's
man,
important for life.
100%. It is
Yeah,
life. It is
yeah,
life.
it's important.
You know. Well, before I let you go, man, anything else you want to share with the audience?
Well, just believe you can. A lot that we've mentioned in this episode is mindset and just knowing that it's possible. And, my whole life I wasted. I was turning myself down before I even attempted and get turned down by somebody else because of the way that I believed. And so, I wasted decades of my life under those beliefs. And so, just know that you can do it and just put your minds to it. It'll work out.
I think we can leave it there, my friend. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
coming on the show. We're gonna have to do it again.
I'd love to. Nice to meet you.
All right, Flip Flop fam, that does it for me and David. All of his information will be in the show notes. Make sure you go check him and his book out. Don't forget to grab the free copy of the book on the website. And until next time, keep it on the flip side. Cheers.